For centuries, the word Orient has carried a special sense of mystery and wonder. It brings to mind golden deserts, ancient temples, colorful markets, and people living lives that seem distant and different from the West. But what if this image, the way the East has been shown in books, paintings, and films, was never really about the East at all? What if it was actually a story the West told itself? This is the heart of Orientalism, the way Western powers have imagined, described, and controlled the East for hundreds of years. And today on Histrology Hub, we're diving deep into how this idea was created, how it spread, and why it still shapes the modern world. The birth of an idea. The word Orient comes from Latin meaning the rising of the sun. It referred to lands east of Europe, places like Egypt, Arabia, Persia, India, and China. For Europeans, these lands were filled with beauty, danger, and secrets, worlds both admired and feared. But Orientalism is not just about geography. It's about how the West looked at these regions, not as equals, but as exotic and mysterious others. It turned entire civilizations into fantasy, often beautiful, but always strange. Napoleon and the discovery of Egypt. The story begins in 1798 when Napoleon Bonaparte led his army into Egypt. It wasn't just a military campaign, it was a scientific mission too. Napoleon brought with him hundreds of scholars, artists, and scientists to study and document every detail of Egyptian life, history, and culture. They measured temples, copied hieroglyphs, and painted scenes of daily life. The result was a massive 23-volume book called Description of Egypt. It revealed a world that most Europeans had never seen, ancient, mysterious, and breathtaking. But this discovery also turned Egypt into a museum for Western imagination. It wasn't about how Egyptians saw themselves, it was how Europe wanted to see them. The East became a subject to study, describe, and control. The power behind the image. European scholars, writers, and artists began creating powerful images of the East. Images of snake charmers, veiled women, lazy sultans, and endless deserts. They called it exotic, but what they really created was a stereotype. This was the foundation of Orientalism, the belief that the West was rational and modern, while the East was emotional, mysterious, and backward. These ideas shaped how people thought and how empires ruled. When Britain and France expanded their empires across Asia and the Middle East, they used Orientalist thinking to justify their power. They claimed they were bringing civilization and progress to people who couldn't govern themselves. In truth, it was about domination, not discovery. Romanticism and the exotic East. In the 1800s, European poets and artists fell in love with the idea of the Orient. Writers like Lord Byron, Victor Hugo, and Gustave Flaubert filled their works with Eastern imagery. Harem girls, desert adventures, and forbidden love. Painters like Jean-Léon Gérôme and Delacroix created dazzling scenes of Arab markets and Turkish palaces. These images were beautiful, but they were fantasies, not reality. They turned living cultures into symbols of desire, danger, and mystery. The real people of these lands, Egyptians, Persians, Arabs, Indians, rarely had a voice in these stories. They were painted and written about, but never heard. The 20th century and beyond. Even in the 20th century, Orientalism didn't disappear. It simply changed shape. It moved from paintings and poems into Hollywood films, news media, and pop culture. In movies, the Arab world was often shown as a land of oil, war, and magic carpets. Asian characters were turned into villains or mystics, and the same old stereotypes, mysterious women, violent men, corrupt rulers, kept returning. Through these stories, millions of people grew up with a filtered image of the East, one designed through Western eyes. Edward Said and the Book That Changed Everything. In 1978, a Palestinian scholar named Edward Said changed the world's understanding of this subject forever. His book, Orientalism, argued that for centuries the West has studied, represented, and ruled the East through a system of power, not truth. Said showed that Orientalism wasn't just about art or literature. It was a political tool that made colonialism seem natural and justified. By describing Eastern people as weak, irrational, or backward, it became easier for Western powers to rule them for their own good. This was a powerful idea, and it caused huge debate. Said wasn't just criticizing Western writers, he was challenging how entire systems of knowledge were built. Culture, power, and knowledge. Said's message was simple but revolutionary. Who gets to describe a culture, and who gets to be described, is never neutral. Every book, painting, or news report about the East carries hidden power. It shapes how the world sees those people, and how they see themselves. Even modern experts, journalists, and politicians still use Orientalist language today, talking about the Muslim world, Middle Eastern violence, or Asian discipline, as if entire regions could be summed up in one phrase. Gender and the veil Orientalism also created strong gender stereotypes. Western artists often painted Eastern women as silent, mysterious, and imprisoned behind veils, while portraying Western women as free and modern. These images weren't innocent, they justified colonial ideas. They suggested that Western powers were saving oppressed women from their backward cultures. But these stories rarely asked what those women actually thought or wanted. From colonies to nations. When Asian and Middle Eastern countries began to win independence in the 20th century, they also began to reclaim their own stories. Writers, filmmakers, and thinkers from Egypt, India, Iran, and beyond started showing the East from the inside, not as outsiders saw it. Yet Orientalist ideas still echo in the modern world, in foreign policy, media coverage, and even pop culture. The same contrasts, East versus West, modern versus traditional, still shape headlines today. Why Orientalism still matters. Orientalism isn't just history, it's a lens we still look through. When we see news about the Middle East or Asia, when movies use Eastern culture as decoration, or when people talk about the West and the rest, we are often repeating old patterns we don't even notice. Understanding Orientalism means learning to question how knowledge and power work together, and how imagination can be used to control as well as to inspire. A new way forward. Today, new generations of artists, scholars, and storytellers are rewriting the story. They're blending traditions, reclaiming histories, and showing the East not as exotic or strange, but as diverse, complex, and deeply human. The world is no longer divided into East and West. We share more than ever, ideas, technology, culture, and hope. And by understanding Orientalism, we can see how the stories of the past still shape the identities of the present. Conclusion. Orientalism is not just about how the West saw the East, it's about how power, imagination, and storytelling built an entire worldview. It reminds us that every culture, every civilization, deserves to tell its own story, in its own voice. And that's what we explore here on Histrology Hub, the untold stories, the hidden meanings, and the real history behind how we see the world.